Yes, hello, and welcome to Release the Creative, your favorite show about creativity, cognition, and this week's story, Tropes and Stereotypes.
Stereotypes? That's not good.
No,
so I've been told.
No, it is. Super. Let's kick off today's show with a tangent, and that is to say, I love etymology of words, but stereotype is an odd word. Like stereo from both type. Like I don't quite understand why that etymological word means. You're Googling it for me?
Yeah, I'm going to Google this for you because I don't know either. To me, it sounds like we're picking out high-end audio gear.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that's true. And I'm just saying, like, you know, I have a working knowledge of Latin, 4 years in high school and college, and I have a internet knowledge of Greek etymology and stuff. I can't figure out, where is stereotype coming from?
Well, Google says it's French, but that's not nearly enough information.
Yeah, so it's Latin. Cool.
Time usage from 19th century. You know, Google is really great at giving us a lot of information.
Most of it useless.
That is not exactly what we asked.
But while you're Googling that, I want to kind of talk and get our audience listening audience a little bit more understanding what we're talking about today. Throughout all literature, movies, television, as well as even, you know, internet memes and almost all visual and literary media, we find the same things done over and over and over. And now this could go straight into, well, there's only so many stories, you know, man versus wild, wild versus man. And that isn't even what I mean. I mean, I think one of the best examples that I want to talk about, just kick it off, is there's a movie called Spanish Prisoner starring Steve Martin in the mid 90s. It wasn't good. And people who say otherwise don't know what good movies look like. But what was so interesting about this particular film is that Steve Martin plays the bad guy. It is not a comedy at all. It's not even like, oh, it's a dry comedy. No, it's not a comedy at all. And Steve Martin plays the villain. And he found the edge of his range. But that's not the point.
You're saying there's a reason that it didn't happen again.
It didn't. Again, it's not a terrible movie, but you could kind of tell that Steve Martin was out of his depth. But the main character, who the actor's name I've completely forgotten, who wasn't Steve Martin, the protagonist, he has access to this formula, and Steve Martin, the antagonist, is trying to con it from him and steal it from him throughout the film. You don't know that he's trying to con it, but that's kind of the plot. And at the very end, there's this kind of sting sort of operation, and this man walks up to him on the boat where this drop is supposed to happen, and it's an Asian man with 3 cameras around his neck, and like he is the walking stereotype of a bad Asian tourist in New York City. It takes place in New York City,
right?
And he knows he has this formula, and he knows it's going to get stolen, or it's going to be tried to be stolen. And this guy walks up and he's like, "I suppose you're here to steal this for China." Or something to that general effect. And the guy kind of opens up his shirt, and you see an FBI badge. And after kind of the climax, he goes, "Why?" And he goes, "No one pays attention to an Asian tourist." And so my point to that is, like, they used the trope as a trope in the film because it's a trope. And my point is, what I want to kind of talk about today is the cognitive and creative reasons that these things get embedded in our brains. And stereotypes are very harmful, but they can also be useful. And yeah,
so I'm finding here this is actually a mid 19th century word. It does not go back very far, honestly. And its original meaning was image perpetuated without change. So
okay, you know what, that makes sense, both etymologically and
yeah, it's more along the lines of, once I see something, I'm going to file that away in my brain as done.
As done. I'm going to save that. And what's interesting is we were talking, where were we talking about this? About I was talking about this on TikTok, actually, about the first lie always wins. And we talked about it last week as well. If something moves into that parking space, it doesn't matter if someone else comes along and says, "Hey, that's my parking space. I'm sorry, this spot is full.
It's taken."
You can call the tow truck and it can get towed, but I'm sorry, this spot is full. And so stereotypes often move in, and sometimes they are completely inaccurate and sometimes they're not. But today's episode, I want to just talk about tropes and why cognitively we beat the crap out of them, and how we all complain about them while loving it.
Keep coming back again and again. Yeah, I mean, you are the one. People like to complain about tropes. I always remember the reason that you tell. The reason you tell people to use stereotypes in the situation where you need to get to the point quickly.
Very quickly.
They can be helpful shortcuts.
Yeah.
If you are going, and you usually use this in context of a short film. If you're doing a short film about a grocer, it helps if he's dressed in like the stripy apron, or has the poofy chef's hat and he's in the bakery. It's like, these are really just shorthand stereotypes, and it's like, well, just because he's wearing a puffy hat doesn't mean he's a baker. It's like, well, in the context of this 4-minute film, it does. Right.
No, and I mean that all. I even fell upon that myself. I was just leaving Los Angeles and I was helping out some friends, and I was being a substitute teacher here in Northern Virginia, and they asked me if I would direct a student showcase, help direct students in their like 5-minute scenes with each other. And I sat down with this group, this male and female actor, and they were doing this scene, and I'm watching it, and I stopped. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on here. Like, oh, well, it's a first date. And I'm like, okay. He was like, but we've decided that he's actually gay and she's this. And they started to like unfold all of this really rich backstory. Now, in all fairness, they're high school theater students. They're told to do that. But they start unfolding this remarkably rich and in-depth backstory to these two characters. And I'm like, guys, this is a 4-minute film. If I don't know what's happening in the first 5 seconds, I'm not going to get there. Like, you don't have time to unwrap that much character development. If he, like, I'm not saying that we need to be one note, and I'm not saying that we need to be a total stereotype, but right now I'm honestly watching a goth girl and a gay guy confusing why they're having dinner, and you're like, the joke you're trying to tell isn't there because you're trying so hard to not be a stereotype. You're just not telling a good story.
So I've pulled up here 35 movie tropes and how to avoid them in screenwriting. Google has brought me here. I don't know if we'll go through all 35 here.
Probably not.
I wanted to hit some, and maybe we could talk about, I guess, why they work, right?
Sure.
So the first one on the list that caught my eye, they call it Villain's Throne. Protagonist walks into a dark room, turns on a light, and there's the antagonist quietly waiting in his huge dramatic chair. Bonus points if they're petting a cat.
Absolutely. I mean, that is everything from, Inspector Gadget to a lot of Bond movies. All Bond movies, and of course Austin Powers, which is of course making fun of Bond movies. So it's the other one that I hope is on this list is the horror movie of woman or man coming out of shower, like looks in the mirror, it's fine, moves the mirror, and there's like moves the medicine cabinet mirror, and there's someone behind them.
Playing with mirrors.
Or the exact same thing of high school student, male or female, opens locker door, closes locker door, and face right behind the locker door.
I just control F'd on this page, and you jumped all the way to 35. Mirror scare. It's like a jump scare, but even more cliched.
Yeah, and I mean, what's funny is that some of these are so cliched we expect them, but we still jump.
Yeah, I would say that, like, all of the good ones on this list, I can not only think of them being used, I can think of movies that parodied them.
Right.
Like the Villain's Throne. There's been more than one time I've seen a character who's like, will come in and the antagonist is there and he's like, I've been waiting here for 2 hours in the dark. I've seen that more than once.
So what's really funny is I watched a movie literally last night. I didn't know I was about to talk about this, but I watched a movie last night, and it was really, I'm about to totally destroy this movie. So if you have any interest in watching the movie Filth on Amazon Prime with James McAvoy, either turn off the podcast now, don't do that, or just recognize I'm about to totally destroy the ending. So you've been warned. Filth, James McAvoy, very interesting film, trigger warning, it's deeply disturbing. But what's very interesting is that it was the opening scene. Literally the opening scene, and you're watching high heels walk, and you're watching this kind of sequence, and you're kind of following behind this woman in a fur coat and these high heels. And I said out loud, I was like, why is James McAvoy in drag? Like, we've not seen this person's body shape. They're in a big fur coat. We've not seen their legs. We've not seen anything. I was like, it's super interesting to open up this film with James McAvoy in drag. This is going to be interesting. And it cuts to the person's face, and it wasn't James McAvoy. It was the female of it. I was like, that's so strange. I was so sure of it. I was positive. Pause. 2/3 through the movie, you find out that James McAvoy is a delusional crossdresser, and that actually was James McAvoy. It was just his vision of himself. It wasn't him, the actor, but it was him, the character. I called that in the first 15 seconds based on the shot of the bottom of shoes walking, because I knew this is a reveal. They're not showing me this person for a reason. It's going to be a big deal. James McAvoy is the star. It's going to be James McAvoy.
Yeah, is it? I don't know if Alfred Hitchcock said it or he just did it, but I believe it was what you get from his movies that like the first person you see is the most important in his opinion. And what is the movie where with the train station? I've seen movie. You memorize this stuff, but there's
Unbreakable.
No, Alfred Hitchcock movie where it starts off with characters getting out of cars at Union Station here in DC. Actually, it's shot in DC.
Interesting.
And they're getting out of the cars, and the camera starts on their shoes, and this one character has like these checkered shoes, or they're very distinct in some way. And then the camera pulls back, and it's like this person with the unique shoes in the crowd is the most important person in this movie, and that's because that's the first thing we saw, and they were unique.
Interesting. You've stumped me on that one. So I'm sure I've seen. I don't know that particular one, but it was just interesting. Amazon suggested that you might enjoy Filth. Enjoy was the wrong word to use for them, but I did watch it. I did not hate it. It's just a remarkably interesting film, but it's on the list of characters. I hadn't heard of any of them other than Jim Broadbent, but James McAvoy beats Jim Broadbent by an order of magnitude or 3 in modern stardom. Not so true 10 years ago, but and literally I knew the stars in the film. I knew the thing, and it opened up on stiletto pumps, and I thought, I wonder why James McAvoy is in drag. And I was actively disappointed when I was wrong. And then I was vindicated an hour later when I found out that, yes, that wasn't him, the actor, but that they replay that scene, and it absolutely was him, the character, but that the actress we saw was his vision.
So this is a good example of tropes are so ingrained that you can mess with the trope and you don't throw the audience off. They use that on purpose in this case.
And what's funny is me, like, for those of that are new to the new listeners or don't know kind of my background, I, went to film school, went to Los Angeles. I've been watching and studying films for lots of years. I used to work at film festivals, watching, screening, and purchasing film properties. I've watched every trope done, good, bad, and everywhere in between. And I've come to find a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Comfort and peace in tropes. So like, okay, cool. I know where this is going. And I'm delighted when I'm wrong, but I'm also aggravated when I'm wrong badly. Like, I was like, dude, they did that so wrong. So it's this very interesting dichotomy of doing something correctly, doing something wrong on purpose, or breaking a trope well. It's
like anything in our line of work is there's a million opportunities to break rules, and you should break rules as often as you can, but you should always be able to explain why.
Right. No. Yeah, absolutely. It's Dr. Carmen Simon. I interviewed her for my book. She wrote a book called Impossible to Ignore, which jumped off my Amazon wish list at me because Glass River Media here, our slogan is "Don't be ignored," and it was before I knew about this book and before she even wrote it, actually. And so this book, Impossible to Ignore, and she talks about how, from a cognition standpoint, the two of the many things that the human brain just loves is patterns and the comfort in patterns, and surprises. I'm like, wait a minute, no, like you can't have both, but you absolutely can, which is where those like stab startles come from. Like, we know the killer is under the bed. But when we find the killer under the bed or behind the door, not under the bed, like by that 10% shift, you've delighted the audience because you've both surprised them and made them comfortable and given them the dopamine reward that they were right.
Surprise is the heart of fear and humor.
Yeah, it's kind of weird like that. Humans are messed up, man.
It all works out. This Hitchcock movie actually is called Strangers on a Train, which I would have never come up with in a million years.
I'm an idiot. Yes, of course it is. Of course it is. And they remade that one a few years later. Not Hitchcock, but I think it's still called Strangers on a Train the second time, too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, back to our list of tropes. We have the hot and cold, will they or won't they? Well, we all know they eventually will, especially if the series is wrapping up.
It's really the will they or won't they is an interesting one. Because like sometimes the greatest payoff is that they don't. I remember in 2007, the movie Once had just come out. It was an independent film. Have you ever seen it?
What is the plot? It sounds very familiar to me.
A Scottish folk singer vacuum repairman is in love and brokenhearted. As ridiculous as that sounds, that's actually a pretty adequate description.
Do you realize how little that narrows it down?
A Scottish folk singer vacuum repairman? You know more than one movie with that plot?
No, I did not see that movie.
It is, I remember I walked into the ArcLight in Hollywood, and I used to do this thing when I lived there called movie roulette, where if I had a few hours to burn and I didn't have enough time to get home and get back, like I was on a film set or had a thing or had a meeting and I was downtown, I would go see a movie to just like, and because I was in film acquisitions and all that stuff, I would walk in, and if there was a movie I wanted to see, I would of course see that. But especially in Hollywood, there were so many movies that no one had ever heard of in theaters. So I used to do this thing where I would walk up and I would pick 3 films I'd never heard of, and I would say to the person, I was like, hey, these 3 films, which is best? And they'd be like, oh, well, what kind of movie? I didn't ask what kind of movie I like. And they'd be like, well, I haven't seen this one. And they'd give me always some kind of half-hearted 17-year-old, I don't know, people really like this one. I was like, cool. And I'd go see it. And this day I walked in and I was like, hey, I've never heard of Once. And they're like, oh yeah, it's a Scottish folk singer who fixes vacuums, falls in love with this chick. I'm like, okay. And he's like, oh, and it's a musical. I'm like, okay, I'm in. Not because that sounds good. It actually sounds terrible. But for the record, it's amazing. It's super good. You specifically would love it.
I would pair it with Waking Ned Devine, another movie I haven't seen, but I feel like they would go together.
Yeah, actually, I've seen both. And yes, that's not a unfair pairing. But the entire movie, it is an absolute love story between the 2 main characters, except that he is pining for another woman the entire film. Like that's the plot of the movie, is that he's pining for this. And 2/3 through the movie, he kind of makes a move at the main character, and she says, no, what are you doing? And kind of shuts it down. And the end of the movie, spoilers again, but this is 2007, this one's on you, is him getting on a bus to go to England. They're in Scotland. Go to England to chase her down and get her back. And it ends there. And I remember talking to my coworkers the next day, like, oh my gosh, like he was so in love with her. No, he wasn't. He was infatuated with her. Not the one he was like they were supposed to get together. I was like, no, they weren't. I was so happy that she shut it down and that it didn't go there. And that at the end, he went after the woman that he had been pining over. It was delightful that they didn't do the thing that everyone knew they were going to do.
It's a little unusual, but I feel that there's 2 distinct categories of love story and a movie versus a TV show. Because a movie, you have the choice as a writer in these 2 hours. What way is the story going to end? That's the question. Whereas with a ongoing TV show, it's a matter of the will they won't they is the hill up, and then once they get together, it's the hill down on the end.
Right.
And like, how many seasons are we expecting here? Are we going to peak too early, or are we going to drag on too long? It's like a huge calculation to put your will they won't they's together. You have The Office, you have Friends, you have Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like every sitcom.
We have the Ross and Rachel, which is of course the Ross and Rachel. It's so much so that it's a trope with a name that people recognize. Even people that haven't watched Friends are usually familiar with the Ross and Rachel. So much so when the show Suits came out, in the pilot there's Rachel Zane and Michael Ross, and they knew that they were going to set them up as the will they won't they through the entire, and so they are Ross and Rachel. Again, they never make that joke directly, to my knowledge. I've seen the first 7 seasons, but I've never. But it's a trope. They literally named their character Rachel Zane and Mike Ross because they knew they were going to play that trope. You have to keep that tension there. You have to keep the will they or won't they. You have to keep it alive. I have always really enjoyed it in shows like The Big Bang Theory, where they played it with Leonard and Penny a little bit, but for the most part, when they got together, for the most part, they just left it. Like, their relationship wasn't the point of contention. That doesn't need to be.
It just was the background.
But I mean, for the record, I could talk for 16 podcasts about just random media things, but it's interesting. Give me the next one on the list.
High Heels Horror Woman, which is running away and tripping in a horror movie. Most recently brought to light in the Lost World, the Jurassic Park movie, which I don't.
She does. She takes off her heels.
And everybody complained about that. They're like, why on like.
She works on an island with dinosaurs. Why was she wearing heels?
Yeah, no, that was the big complaint, is like, this is so ridiculous to shove that trope into this movie made no sense. And I'm trying to think back. I was like, were they doing like a meta commentary thing? Like, no, I think they just did the high heel tripping thing because they thought it added tension to the dinosaur movie.
No, and so it's an interesting, from a cognition and communication standpoint, which, to make sure that we're at least sort of skirting the line of of our point, is from a cognition and communication standpoint, you have to aim your message at something someone understands. If you don't, they'll be too confused and be trying to figure out what you're talking about. However, if you go too far the other way, if you start doing the Bryce Dallas Howard taking off her heels on you're like, now I'm just being patronized too. Now you're just
Yeah, you gotta touch on it, like use it maybe in a new way or in a light way. But yeah, when you just like outright do this trope like textbook style and have no additional commentary on it, it's a little odd.
When I was in film school, I said to one of my professors, I was like, I want, when I get out, when in a few years, when I've got some cred and enough to I want to write a satirical, witty, dark comedy called Cliche, and the entire movie, all 100 minutes of it, will be like 100% shot for shot tropes. Like there will be nothing interesting. Like it will be a trope from beginning to end, and it'll be a social commentary. It's like, that's every Hollywood movie.
It's not clever.
He's like, you literally just described every Hollywood movie.
Although there are degrees to it. The next one is walking away from an explosion.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful though.
Well, and I feel though that like the tripping in high heels, I feel like some horror movies still do. They're like, they're using the trope as a trope.
Sure.
Walking away from the explosion, of course, there's been outright parodies of it.
Cool guys don't look at explosions.
Yeah,
Google
like
that.
Is that the other guys? Or
that's
is that
Andy Samberg.
And then there's the other guys did with Will Ferrell.
Yeah.
So those are outright jokes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actual honest to goodness action movies that use it, but in a winky way. Like they're not inserting it seriously. It's almost like a joke in the action movie.
I think this might fall into your other guy's example, but one of my kids' favorite movies right now, and I will say it's not nearly as bad as it could be, is My Spy. It's the oh my gosh, I've forgotten his name. The actor that plays Drax on Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, the dude.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I feel so bad that I've forgotten his name right now. But he is a CIA agent that is embedded in this and kind of falls in love with this woman while kind of protecting her like 11-year-old daughter. So it's the pacifier. It's a movie that's been made like 75 times.
Yeah.
It's big, strong guy protects little picked on kid in some capacity and they become friends. We've seen it a bunch, but in this
that
one
in itself is a trope.
Right. This one in particular, he is a CIA agent. And he's like teaching her how to be an agent because she like makes him and she figures it out. And so there's a thing where he's like showing her how to do explosions. And as they're walking away, she turns around, he grabs her head and twists it around so that she can't see the explosion. And I remember like my kids even got it and laughed outwardly. And I was like, you know what? Like I get that it's a trope and that was an obvious thing to do, but that was funny.
Is it played for, is the joke there that like he's protecting her face, or is the joke that he wants her to look cool?
The joke is that cool guys don't look at explosions. They never say that.
But that's what's going on.
The joke is very clearly, she wants to see it. He's like, no. We walk away.
So yeah, I kind of like, I feel like a lot of Hollywood these days is breaking the fourth wall with all the reboots and recycles, and we put the original actor in as a cameo, and I think that extends to tropes that
it does.
Like that's kind of our point, is it's almost impossible to make a story without some of these. And so what they've done is they go all hard in on, well, if we've got to have it, we're going to wink at the audience and acknowledge it.
Well, because and back to the whole point of this razor's edge line, that's your only option, because your two choices otherwise are to make something that is so nonsensically left field that it's hard to relate to. And you see the people do this all the time. I saw a movie with some friends, I don't know, like 2 years ago, and I really enjoyed it. For the record, this movie got destroyed. It's called Serenity. It's not the one you guys are thinking of. It's Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway, I believe, and some other stars. It plays off of some, again, I'm going to destroy this movie, so if you haven't seen it or want to, about to ruin the ending, you're watching a movie and it's insanely surreal, like almost like David Lynch surreal. And for those of you who don't know about my feelings on David Lynch, they aren't positive. But like, it's this really surreal film, but in a way that doesn't feel heavy-handed. It feels really strange. And at the end, I don't know if you know how much I hate the "and it was all a dream." It wasn't all a dream. At the end, you find out that that all of it was a video game, and that we were watching the main characters and the NPCs inside of a video game, and not in a Free Guy sort of way, the Ryan Reynolds film, but in a completely straight-faced, surreal, dark. And I thought, I was like, wow, that was an interesting take on it. But I read the reviews. People hated it because it was a take on it's a dream trope, which I also hate. It was it didn't hit anything that they felt comfortable or close to. So it was kind of universally panned. I read all of the reviews and I thought all of them were unfair because people were like, man, everything I read about it was someone expecting it to have towed the line closer. But when they broke too far from the line, and I enjoyed it, but I was like one of 4 people. Yeah,
there's a lot of things where like it hits you in a way that it doesn't. Like I definitely have. We call those guilty pleasures.
Sure,
but we call them guilty pleasures. But sometimes it's not. You need to be guilty. It's just that no, you got what the artist was trying to say, and it just didn't speak to anyone else in the world.
I will say, again, I'm going to spoil Avengers Endgame now. So if you haven't seen Endgame by this point, though, there's not much I can do for you. I will say that at the end, when Thanos snapped and the movie was over, I laughed out loud and clapped. I saw it opening night to a sold-out theater. This is pre-pandemic. At the end of it, there was no oxygen left in the people were like, and they were like, and it was over. And I literally out loud started laughing, and people were like, how could you? I was like, that was the ballsiest thing they could have. Like, that was the coolest. I want to give them a hug for how awesome that was. And everyone was furious. Be like, how could you celebrate this? I was like, how could you not?
Did I show you the guy that re-edited Toy Story 3?
No.
It was like Christmas. This is like 2 or 3 years ago. You should look it up on YouTube. He took Toy Story 3, which you recall is they're in the daycare center. The bear takes them to the dump, and they're all going towards the incinerator.
Sure.
And I remember the first time I saw this movie, it was so intense. I was sitting in the theater being like, okay, what, like, it's a kid's cartoon. They're not going to outright die, but like, are they going to melt and be like recycled into new toys? And
that would be a really, really existential.
Yeah, no, I was trying to, in my head, I was like, okay, they're going to burn to death. Like they'll come up with some like save here, but like, how are they going to save them after they're burned? Like that's how intense this was. I remember thinking that in the theater. So this guy edited it where they're going into the fire, and then he just cuts to the credits, and the Randy Newman music starts playing, and his mom had never seen this movie, and so it's like Christmas time, the whole family's watching the movie, and the mom's like, what? And the guy, he's filming with his phone, he's like movie's over. She's like, what do you mean the movie's over? He's like, no, that's the end of the movie. And the happy music playing over the credits. She's like, they all burned to death. And he's like, yeah, that's how the movie ends. And she's like, that's a terrible movie. And so she goes on like this rant about how awful that is, and they didn't tell her. He then uploads another clip from the next day where she's going on about how bad it is, and like his dad knows what he did and is like laughing at her. And finally she's like, why do you all think this is so funny? And they explained it to her, and she like, it's like, oh my god.
No, I mean people thought that I was just punking them and being a jerk on purpose, and I mean I'm a jerk, but I wasn't being intentionally jerky. I thought the fact that they ended with Thanos winning, especially since I knew it was part 1 of 2.
Yeah.
I thought that ending there was the most brilliant. I'm not even from a marketing standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, from a cognition standpoint, from a creativity standpoint, from a breaking the script standpoint. No one going into that movie, everyone knew that it was part 1 of 2. Everyone knew there was another movie, but no one. I'm going to get so many comments. I knew.
Well, no, I will say that, I don't know much about Marvel Universe in general, but I know whenever there's a movie where the sequel's coming out 6 months later, where like they're shot together 6 months later, that's a good sign that there's going to be an interesting break. Now, I didn't know that was going to be it, but I didn't predict that. But you always know that, like, no, this is going to be different than when there's like 2 years between sequels.
Sure.
They got more room to play.
No, and I will say, like, I was so excited. I was so happy that they had done that, because so few filmmakers are willing to sometimes do the really bold, crazy, I can't believe the bad guy won move.
Well, there's the subreddit r/Thanos was right.
So just so that we're clear for anyone listening, Thanos was right. Okay. I mean, like, yeah. So my friend, real quick, this is a tangent within a tangent. I have a friend who is an honest to goodness PhD in genetics, and she's like, no, if anything, Thanos was short-sighted. 50% could restore itself in just a few generations. He'd need to go 80% to really make sure that it worked. I'm like, holy crap! She's like, what? If you're looking at this from a sheer biological standpoint of what he's trying to accomplish, 50% is not going to do it. That can be restored. If he wants long-running change, you need 80% or more. I'm like, this just got dark.
So we're only up to number 7 on the list, and we're about out of time here. But I want to hit maybe one more here. My favorite ones on the list are the ones that I can immediately think of my favorite parody of it.
Sure.
Is like that's a good trope, and this one's called Misguided Dad. A father who is more focused on his career than his family. Don't worry, there's always some kind of external force that magically switches his way of thinking or forces him to change.
I hate those movies so much.
My favorite take on this was 30 Rock invented a holiday, a leap year holiday, where they have a character named Leap Year Williams.
Okay.
And in the show, they have a movie starring Jim Carrey. Where it's this trope, which he has done at least a couple of movies
sure.
of
I
that.
mean, Liar Liar is this, Family Man with Nicolas Cage is this.
Yeah, so in the show they watch the movie where Jim Carrey like learns the true meaning of leap year.
That's awful, and I'm about it. But there is actionable intelligence here, and that is that if you're going to give a presentation at work, or you're writing your novel, or you're like avoiding tropes like the plague is a bad move. Walking in, people need to know where they are. They need to understand their frame of reference. We as humans, our cognition is so pattern-based. We love patterns. We are walking prediction engines. So if you come in and start throwing things at me that are completely outside of my frame of reference, and I have no understanding of what you're talking about, or my frame of reference contradicts or discludes your point, I am spending the entire time just trying in a Stargate world, kind of trying to triangulate where you are, like what's up, what's down, what's left, what's right. But at the same time, if you come in and give someone something they've literally heard 100 times, they're going to be like, okay. And so figuring out, how do I build the world out of foundation and cornerstones that they understand, while filling the walls and the things with things they'll be delighted to see. And I don't have any, the trick is, there is no trick. The trick is that it changes constantly, but you have to be aware of playing into your audience's channel, because channels have an expected tone, audiences have an expected tone, ages have an expected tone, and then you get to play around with the surprises.
Yeah, mostly I think you need to use tropes as your scenery. Like, think of it as your stage and your curtains and your backdrop. Those are the tropes. Those are what people expect.
Right.
Then they know what to look at. You know to look at the character in the middle of the stage with the spotlight on it.
Right.
Because the curtains are normal.
Sure.
And so that works in a movie form too. If you're going to have some kind of crazy detective, maybe he's psychic, maybe he wears a Hawaiian shirt, I don't know, but you put him on a force with a bunch of guys in uniforms, and you know, oh, this is our main character because he's surrounded by tropes and stereotypes.
Boy, do I love Psych. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I thought of that too.
My kids and I both watch Psych and The Mentalist, which objectively, if you want to tell someone the plot line of Psych and The Mentalist, they're the same show.
Pretty darn close.
They are one is a actual psychic, one is a claimed psychic, and one is one that used to claim he was psychic, but they are both hyper observant people working in accordance with, as contractors, working in accordance with the police force to solve crime. They're the exact same show, except one just bashes itself and the other one takes itself very, very seriously, and they're both delightful shows and I enjoy both of them. I've watched them through. I love them, but they've set the stage with tropes we understand. We all know what psychics are. We all know what police dramas look like. And they play to every trope. Both episodes have the same episode of, well, this is the cheating husband episode, and this is the gardener did it episode, and this is they have so many of the exact same episodes, but where they get to play with that is in the dressing, in the story they tell on the stage. You have to start from a point of understanding, because if you don't, your audience doesn't know where they are. They have to be able to triangulate. And tropes, Again, never start your book with "It's a Dark and Stormy Night," and definitely don't start your white paper with "It's a Dark and Stormy Night." That's not going to go your way.
I would read that white paper.
For the record, I would read that white paper. So maybe it will go your way. But tropes are your stage, and let your surprises be your dressing. And I like that analogy. But it's an important thing to remember. And this week was stereotypes and tropes. And we tend to, especially right now with the climate of what it is, with everything from sexism, misogyny, things. And I'm in no way saying that we should just, stereotypes are real. I'm literally not saying that. I'm just saying that from a cognition standpoint, playing into what the imagery that people are comfortable with is often a really strong way to get people on the same page with you so that you can change their mind or entertain them or sell to them or whatever. But you can't do that from a point of outside of their frame of reference. It's never going to go your way.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely out of time, but that reminds me of, the original Ghostbusters was supposed to be set in the future.
And they were wizards.
Yeah, well, they were Ghostbusters, but it was supposed to be Ghostbusters were as common as Garbage Men.
Right,
they were the plumbers of the future. And it was supposed to be this big sci-fi epic, and then it turned into that was Dan Aykroyd's original script. And then, budgetary constraints made them realize, hey, let's set it in modern day New York. But what that gave them, and what Men in Black later perfectly ripped off, is the idea of starting a sci-fi movie of Ghostbusters in a weird future. That's a heavy lift to get the audience on board.
Right.
But starting with, it's a college professor. Oh, he got fired. Oh, they have to take out a mortgage to start a business. Oh, all of these little steps are like completely real world things. And that's what they did in Men in Black. We're like, oh, he's a cop. Oh, he saw something kind of weird. Oh, he met a guy in a black suit. It's like you take these little steps, but you start from a completely boring, benign, normal, real world thing.
Harry Potter is the exact same.
He lives in a little town in England.
Abused orphan, under the stairs, bratty cousin, mean caretakers. It was Oliver for the first 20 pages.
Even frickin' Star Wars starts with the farmer, like the kid in the desert who has to do a chore for his uncle. You always want to start just real basic, and oftentimes real basic means some kind of trope.
Yeah, like start from a frame of reference that your audience gets. If you start somewhere else, they're going to take a lot of time just getting oriented, and you'll be on page 4 and they're still on page 1, and that's not a good place. That's not a good place.
Unless you're writing, the 36th Marvel movie, then maybe your audience is on board.
Hey, we have 15 more to get there. And by that point, they know where they are.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's the amount of work you need to put in.
Awesome. Well, this has been Release the Creative this week, Tropes and Stereotypes. And, we will see you next week.
Yep. See you soon. Thanks for joining us here at Release the Creative. Kirk here would never say it to your face, but he thinks you should like and subscribe to us on YouTube.
And Jeff is far too shy to admit it, but he thinks you should subscribe to us on your favorite podcast reader.
Yeah? Well, you're the one who's always saying that everyone should give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
Why do you have to make everything so difficult?